And I'm so happy that we could get Tom Gallagher to speak. He's a longtime friend of ours. We're very pleased to hear from Tom Gallagher today, who has been active in politics for decades. So it will be interesting hearing his take on our current administration. He was an elected socialist state representative back in Massachusetts, been a Democratic convention delegate for both George McGovern and Bernie Sanders, and served as an election observer, supervisor, officer in 8 foreign nations. He is a member of the United Educators of San Francisco and writes frequently on political issues. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you, Dolores. And good afternoon to all of you. So the initial request in this and discussion back and forth was on a socialist take on the Biden administration. And I don't want to be too complicated about that. Try to be quite simple. I'm looking at it from the point of view of someone already mentioned that I was a Sanders delegate, someone who believes that the Sanders campaign in 2016 brought the United States belatedly into the 20th century, a few years late. And whose socialism I'll just describe simply as a belief that the economy ought to be under democratic control, and quite open as to what means that might be. We had the strange thing a few years ago of Paul Krugman declaring that Bernie Sanders wasn't a socialist because he didn't want to nationalize everything. I am a socialist, and I think Bernie Sanders is a socialist in the general belief that the economy needs to be democratized, whether in certain areas it should be nationalized, whether it's a matter of workers' control, regional control, all of that is secondary to democratic control of the economy. So nothing fancier than that for a definition from me. Excuse me, on to the topic, the overall take on the Trump administration. Well, excuse me, on the Biden administration, and I'm already thinking of it obviously in comparison to the Trump administration. That's an easy one. It's better. Those of you who watch late night TV know that the defeat of Donald Trump has been a terrible thing for comedy, but pretty much good for everything else. More significantly, I would say that I think that thus far, the thrust of the Biden administration has also been better than that of the Clinton and Obama administrations. So that wasn't necessarily obvious at the outset. I think there are clear reasons for that. There are two of them, fundamentally. One is the crises that we are living through and have lived through. After all, we had a national eviction moratorium under Donald Trump. We had increased unemployment benefits under Donald Trump. So the rules of lots of things changed even before Joe Biden came in. The second basic reason for this is, as a result of the Sanders campaigns that I've referred to already, we now have an actually existing left in the political world. What Bernie Sanders did was take the idea of socialism as from something that was simply discussed in university seminars and coffee houses into people's living rooms in the debates. We now had the $15 an hour minimum wage, free college tuition being part of the political program, broadly speaking across the Democratic Party, and not a strange thing to Republicans even. Obviously, that happened because we now have a left in politics. I think Biden has been generally respectful of that. He's been at least solicitous of the opinions of the Bernie Sanders left. And again, that is, I think, a significant difference to his predecessor candidate, Hillary Clinton. A couple of interesting things that have happened at this point that are new, and they're not specific to the Biden administration, but quite important to it. Number one, I think we now see parties acting much more like parliamentary parties in parliamentary systems, meaning that on some issues you can find absolute unity on both the Democratic and the Republican Party. That was not nearly as common in the past, and it's not universal, obviously, at this point. But the ability for the Democrats to thus far pass certain significant things with a tiny majority in the House and only a working majority in the Senate because the vice president is the deciding vote and is a Democrat, that is not something that existed in the past very much. And I think we can credit actually the Republicans for this. They have been acting like a parliamentary naysaying party for some time. And I think the Democrats have, to a certain extent, caught up with this. Of course, it does mean that we do have a party of one in the Senate in the person of Joe Manchin of West Virginia, who gets to decide what can be done and what cannot be done. I think also that a lot of people on the left, broadly speaking, have a new understanding or a new attitude towards the Democratic Party. There has been, I think, in the past, a tendency towards absolutism. You either think the Democratic Party is a good thing or it's a bad thing, period. But anyone who has been in politics sort of knows that there are no permanent friends, no permanent enemies on issues, meaning you're with somebody one day and you got to get used to the fact that you're going to be against them the next day, and that's normal. You don't write that person off or write that person in simply on the basis of one vote. And that level of sophistication, I think, has been largely absent in a large part of the American left for a while. I think the 2016 campaign was actually instructive and interesting in that way, more so than 2020, because Sanders and Clinton went all the way to the end. And it was something like what, a 55-45 split overall between the two of them in terms of total votes in the primaries. If you would have looked at that outcome and imagined it in a parliamentary setting, what the outcome would have been a coalition of the Clinton-led Liberal Party and the Sanders-led Socialist Party, with the Liberals having dominance in it. And it would have been an example of political groups who run against each other, really oppose each other, fundamentally on many issues, at the end having to coalesce. This is a normal thing because they regard the other group as better than, in our case, the Republicans. This is not high level of sophistication for people in Europe, South America, most parliamentary situations, but unfortunately, I think it was a level of sophistication that we did not have in the United States. On to the particulars of the Biden administration thus far. I do think we see something of a New Deal sensibility to it. I'm going to read you a quote about the administration and then tell you surprisingly who it's from. Right after Biden's State of the Union address, one famous person said, if Democratic candidates over the last 10 years had campaigned on the overdue agenda conveyed by President Biden yesterday, they would have landslided the Republicans. Biden's agenda is their campaign message for 2022 if they want to win. That was said by Ralph Nader, who, as we know, famously went third party 21 years ago. And he was that impressed by at least the rhetoric. So that's an interesting development. Again, I would say not terribly expected. I'm going to try and quickly run through 5 major areas, sort of going from the best on part of the Biden administration to the worst. The first one would be sort of the general area of human rights and human respect, if you might, if you want to call it that. Um, what I mean by the human respect is we know we went through 4 years of outrageous insults to all manner of groups in this country coming from the White House. That is more or less over. That's doesn't pay the rent at the end of the month or anything like that. But on the other hand, seems to me that level of civility is extremely important. We should not have to spend every day fretting about the preposterous things that were said by the president the night before. We should be able to actually consider instead what the import is of initiatives that come from the White House. And the general drift has been something of a sea change, I think. Biden calls for legislation to improve policing across the United States. That doesn't mean it's going to happen. The federal government actually has relatively little power in that compared to many other issues. But it is important to have someone in the White House that recognizes there's been a serious problem. He is calling for restriction of high powered firearms. Again, not something that the White House can get done. That coalition or that unity of the Democratic Party, which we've seen a few times up to now, does not hold on matters like this. But nonetheless, a recognition of the reality of the violence of life and the violence directed towards certain groups in our society is a significant thing. To hear the president speak favorably of transgender people, again, this is a level of civility that is welcome and is new over the past 4 years. There are efforts afoot to provide $4 billion in debt relief to minority farmers. The bankers are crying and screaming about it already. We will see how it comes out. But again, a type of recognition of the reality of life for Black Americans and others that is welcome and that is necessary to have any substantial improvement. So, as I say, I think this is probably the strongest area of the Biden administration. It's the one that has the least tangible impact. Moving on to the economy. Now, I would have to say, in some respects, the Biden administration has been pleasantly surprising at this point, given that we know he has assured his big financial people that fundamentally nothing will change if he's president, right? This is where we started out with. On the other hand, since the administration has come in, they've done one particularly important thing in committing themselves to greater IRS enforcement. Why is that important? Nobody likes the IRS, but it is important because wages are pretty much always accurately reported. And working people make their living overwhelmingly off of wages. Profits, etc., are not. And the people who have been getting away with a huge amount of tax evasion have, of course, been the very wealthy. So that is a major substantial start that does matter. Even more substantial, I think, has been his proposals for infrastructure development and the recognition of so-called human infrastructure. The message of the administration thus far is that government can do things and that government should do things. As we know, starting back from Ronald Reagan, there has been an immense effort to downgrade the possibility and desirability of the government doing much of anything. So this is a substantial turnaround. Now, what's going to happen with it, of course, is hard to say. Biden's already has offered to downsize American Jobs Plan. A lot of people thought it was good, but really inadequate to the task in the first place. He's offered to downsize it for Republicans from 2.3 trillion to 1.7 trillion. Many important areas go from that. And as critics have already said, if Democrats learned anything from the past 10 years, it has to be the negotiating against ourselves doesn't work. the Obama administration, I think, was guilty of that over frequently. The idea that you're going to make common cause with the Republicans. Now, there is a question of holding the majority in Congress, which I do recognize, but we do not need to be making the deal only on our side. An overriding critique of these programs that will develop from the infrastructure proposals, if they in fact go through, is that the general model we have in recent years has been the so-called public-private partnership, that where large private corporations often make huge profits off of public monies. And that what we need to do is to find a method of democratic public ownership. And I alluded to that in the beginning of my general sense of, what socialism ought to be, some way of public ownership of the economy. And we do have a concrete set of programs probably on the horizon over which we should battle about the nature of control. The child care, I talked about the human infrastructure. This has been widely commented on. The child care credit payments going up to $300 a month are immense in terms of being a step forward. They've been discussed for years and years and years, but one estimate is that 88% of American children will be covered by it, that they could lift 45% of children living in poverty above the poverty line, and the Black rate would be 52%. Native American child rate out of poverty would be 62%. So if this goes through, this is major, this is transformative. And again, I think it has to do in great part with the crises we're living through and the fact that there is a more radical element now in American politics that is able to somehow have some relationship with the White House, but be well in advance of it. One of the things we have to keep in mind, of course, and this isn't something that the administration has created, but the increased power and influence of billionaires. The government was obviously incompetent to deal with the COVID crisis in the Trump White House. So who was? Well, Amazon kept the houses stocked. Bill Gates was always involved in worldwide public health. There came to be a reason to believe that you couldn't trust government to be competent, and billionaires could be. Well, we're going to have to do something about that. I won't go into all of the numbers, but I think people know that some of the richest people in the country have seen their wealth mushroom since the epidemic has started, and largely because of the conditions of the epidemic. Which brings us to taxes. If all of Biden's proposed tax increases passed, and the fact that there are proposals for that is news, the total federal tax rate on the wealthy would be significantly lower than the 40s, 50s, and 60s. People know that, but it would be somewhat lower, I should say, than in the mid-1990s. So in the past 20 years, they have done better tax-wise when people weren't even particularly noticing that. There is one interesting, Philip, I'll go into as a sideline on this, the fact that big business is now starting to take a hit on the right, and it has to do with the woke multinationals. Now, I think all of us have probably felt uncomfortable about, we're going to take our lead from multinational corporations telling us about legislation in Georgia. Yeah, they're right on this, but real, please. The reason for the discomfort on the right is obviously the opposite of our general take on this. But if it gets many of the people who have no business being allied with the Republican Party because they're average wage owners. If they start to realize that the big guys are not necessarily on their side, even for the wrong reasons, this is not necessarily a negative development. The world changes in strange ways. Moving on in the economy, labor. We have the first union member to be a Secretary of Labor in 45 years. That in itself is amazing. The last one happened in the last year of the Ford administration in 1976. So that in itself is something. We can assume that the person in that office knows something about working people that might not have been the case in the past. The Congress has passed the $15 minimum wage. Joe Biden is actually regarded as the most pro-union president in generations. It doesn't take much. And then again, we're starting from not much. This administration is trying to remind us that the National Labor Relations Act actually explicitly sought to encourage collective bargaining. He was supportive of the unfortunately failed Amazon effort in Alabama. There is not any recent precedent for this. They have ordered a $15 minimum wage for federal contractors. And again, we know where the precedent of that comes from. And one final thing in this area, education, which doesn't get a lot of attention because the federal government is relatively less involved in that than many of these other fields. They appear to be looking back to the Obama crew that gave us the merit pay idea, failing schools, the testing regimen. So that is not a plus. To the environment, and I will try and wrap up reasonably quickly so that you can speak your minds. The mere recognition that there is a problem in the environment is, of course, a major plus to the Trump White House. Greenpeace really, I think, summed up the situation quite well. They said the day before Biden gave his speech to Congress on the eve of his 100th day, Greenpeace said Biden has taken bolder steps to tackle the climate crisis than any president in history. Okay, sounds good. They also ranked, or graded, I should say, his administration's proposals up to this point. Out of a score of 100, he got 30. Okay, best in history scores 30. Why? Because as their report said, the bar for action is not set by what pundits deem possible, nor the records of past administrations. It's set by science and justice. I thought this was all one of the best assessments of the administration that we've had. Immensely better than Trump, better than Clinton and Obama, but woefully short of what is needed. And that's what we've got to deal with. Since that time, some of you may have seen the International Energy Agency, which is not an environmental group, but a group that advises governments, that said that nations around the world would need to immediately stop approving new coal-fired power plants, new oil and gas fields, and phasing out gasoline-powered vehicles. That's what an agency that's sort of neutral on the issue said. We are nowhere near close to that. Them's the sad facts. Biden has proposed the Civilian Climate Corps, harkens back to the New Deal, great idea, but again, it's at this point simply plans to make plans. On to the lower parts of the Biden agenda, healthcare. The Biden administration does not support Medicare for all. We know that. He came in that way. He said he would veto the bill if it got to his desk. It doesn't get any worse than that. If in the middle of a worldwide pandemic, and it's not just him, of course, a substantial minority of the Democrats in the House oppose Medicare for all. If we can't deal with it at this moment, if it's not obvious at this moment, it's certainly depressing. We can take some comfort, I suppose, in the fact that he did wind up backing suspending patents on vaccines. That's a sense that medical needs override the need for private profit. That's a good thing. But his plans for expanding Medicare and lowering drug costs, his talk about them have not been made into the American Families Plan. So they're really quite flunking in any grades on healthcare. Finally, foreign policy, the worst. It's the area where American government is at its worst, the Democrats are at their worst, and he is at his worst. Biden has been a troglodyte on foreign policy. If any of you saw the last Biden-Sanders debate, Sanders was making the point that whatever you thought of the Chinese government, many people, millions of people, were no longer poor. As the result of what had gone on in China in the last several decades. Biden could not wrap his mind around it. It couldn't be because China was bad. We are starting from ground zero here. And bear in mind, when I started thinking about talking today, I said, well, with the Trump administration is the worst in recent memory. And I thought, see it the way a lot of people do. He did not start any new wars. Was the Trump administration worse than Richard Nixon in the Vietnam War? Was it worse than Lyndon Johnson? Arguably, starting with the high points of the Biden foreign policy, Afghanistan. He's pledged to withdraw, but then again, Trump had committed to withdraw this month. We'll see what that all means. Iran. The Biden administration has gone back to the table, as they put it, with Iran about getting a nuclear deal. But remember, while we would love no new nuclear weapons and no new nuclear nations to come into existence, we would like all nuclear weapons to go. We're going to have a dance again with this administration, with North Korea, get them to give up their nuclear weapons. Well, Kim Jong-un may be crazy, but he ain't stupid, as they say. If you were a country facing the United States and you had the experience of Gaddafi in Libya in the recent past, would you give up nuclear weapons? Would you trust the United States not to militarily overthrow your country? I don't think so. And there will be nothing different from Joe Biden. Central America, actually potentially a somewhat bright spot. I see that the vice president has met with the Guatemalan leaders who have to live in exile in fear of their own government. The U.S., it's in today's paper, has just decided to steer El Salvador funding away from the government to private charities. There is some cause for hope for a somewhat better policy in Central America, relative bright spot. Israel, Palestine, we all know, $735 million weapons sale in the middle of this. Now, the fact that Rashida Tlaib even exists in Congress and has talked to the president is a plus. There is opposition, serious opposition within the Democratic Party. That's a plus. But, hearkening back again to Afghanistan, only in America, someone recently wrote, do wars end and budgets go up? We have just had a new suggestion, as we always do, for even more funding for the military while we're supposedly leaving Afghanistan. China, the strange thing is, if you read the Defense Appropriations Act, you will see all these references to economic rather than military issues regarding China. The economic rivalry with China is considered a military matter, one that goes under the defense appropriations. This is not a good direction. Sanders has proposed auditing the Pentagon. which has never passed an audit thus far. I used to think, and I reflected on this, that the matter of not knowing how many foreign bases the Pentagon has somewhere in the 700s was that it was a matter of military secrecy. When you realize that they can't pass an audit, you realize they may not actually know how many foreign bases they have. That is the unbelievable reality of the American military. I will finish with a quote from Andrew Bacevich, who I recommend to all of you if you don't already know him. He's a professor emeritus of history at Boston University, but he was a 20-some-odd year veteran of the American military, retired as a colonel. His son was military and killed in the Iraq War. Bacevich says, if Biden wants to be Dr. Build Back Better, he should assume the additional role of Dr. Curb the War Habit. That means rejecting once and for all the illusions of military dominion to which too many in Washington still pay tribute, whether cynically or out of misguided conviction. Doing so will require not only imagination, but gumption. Still, if President Biden intends to go big at home, he will need to go big in changing US policies abroad as well. And he says the most important part, the conviction that global power projection, rather than national defense per se, defines the US military establishment's core mission is what's got to go. All right. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Tom. It's very, very enlightening review. If I will lead off, if I may, going back to your original comments about the nature of democratic socialism. You indicated that social control was the defining principle, I think, there, and there are many ways of doing that. I mean, I remember the 2016 election where Bernie Sanders, of course, identifies as a social democrat, and Elizabeth Warren as a capitalist. So, and yet their policies seem to be almost the same. So I was very confused. I don't know if I'm a socialist or a capitalist. So anyway, can you, your definition is very useful. Can you point to a country that would be your ideal of a democratic socialist country?
No, frankly, I can't. It used to be thought when the Democratic Socialist Organizing Committee was the first one that came along with this real name about 40 years ago, that was redundant. Democratic Socialist, because we socialists believe that socialism is more democratic because it extends to the economy, not just to government. But the fact was that the brand had been so damaged by the Soviet Union and so on and so forth, and places that, for example, it's not complicated, but the defining political event of my life, personally, obviously, was the Vietnam War. The idea that we should wage a war on a country because it called itself communist was an abomination to me. At the same time, the governmental structure of Vietnam was not at all a model that was of interest to me or would be interested to most Americans. It's really shouldn't be that complicated, but it has been. But anyhow, the damage was so severe that it was the phrase democratic socialism came into existence, and Sanders, made it a household word. He would talk in the first campaign about Denmark. Now, the nations of Scandinavia, I would say, have come the farthest along by the democratic road towards the sorts of things I would like to see. The mistake, I think, that social democrat is not really a term in use in this country. It is in Europe. If there's a fundamental error in the parties that have taken that name, it's that they've achieved the final goal. So what they have done to me is a step towards what I think we need to see. But none of them, there's none there that I would say that's exactly what we need to get to. We are the big one. If there's ever going to be a big breakthrough, you know, we have the best shot at it in a certain way.
Okay, thank you very much. If others have questions, if you know how to raise your electronic hand, do so, or just wave at me, and I'll try to pay attention and see you. You can put things in the chat, and we already have one thing in the chat, so I'll go ahead and read that. This is from Anne. What might Biden's policy be toward Cuba?
I'm going to hope there's someone else on the call who knows more than I do. You know, I did a bit of looking around, as you might imagine, in various areas before today. It didn't come much to the fore. So I don't think we're going to see a great deal of difference. I think we'll probably try and go back to the Obama era, and Obama was good relatively on that. That was a strength that, you know, this country ought to be talked to. That's my guess.
Okay, great. Other questions? Just wave if you have it. I will try to. Okay, Donald, you have a question. Unmute yourself, Donald.
Yes, I'm wondering why be optimistic when the right wing seems so powerful, unyielding, and anti-democratic? What gives you optimism in that circumstance?
They lost the election.
Is that enough to be optimistic?
Well, it's all relative, as I say. You know, I think that's why I say I was really interested by that Greenpeace take. This is the best we've ever had. It's only gets to 30. So,
Okay.
and it's that's not even a half full.
Oh,
That's a mostly empty.
Sure. Thank you.
Anyone else have a question? David, I believe you have one. Please unmute yourself.
By the way, while we're waiting for the unmute, people wish to hold forth on their own, please feel free.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, I got it. I was clicking the symbol rather than the unmute. Yeah, I just, I feel that we're in a perilous moment, you know, in Congress, especially the Senate, and it kind of looks like to me that if the Democrats don't put a stop to the filibuster, they're not going to get much done. And Joe Manchin seems so far to seem dead set against it. And short of that, I don't see how several of these, you know, fine pieces of legislation are going to have a chance. So could you speak to that?
I think you're absolutely right. The budget reconciliation approach that was brought in a few years ago has sort of worked wonders on things that you can shoehorn into that, right? To get with 51 votes. But if you can't make a reasonable argument, more or less, then you're going to need the 60. And yeah, of course, it's insane that they would allow this to happen, but we've dealt with insanity on the part of people that were forced to, you know, work with for many years. The Senate in itself is fundamentally an undemocratic institution. Ideally, the Senate would be organized like state senates are, just a different number of representatives, but, you know, one person, one vote fundamentally. But of course, the federalist structure of the United States has stuck us with that. I don't know that we get out of it. Making it even worse by the 60 hurdle is crazy. I agree with you, and I wish I could be optimistic about that. I can't.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's just to add a footnote to the Senate structure. It really comes down to slavery dictated that structure so the southern states could have the power that they felt that they needed to have. So it's a legacy of our dismal past.
Okay, I have a question in the chat. Says, relative to Don's question, do you see the destruction of democracy with the Republican states' efforts to suppress votes?
Give me that again.
Yeah. Okay, relative to Don's question, Don, what was your question? It was,
Why can you be optimistic?
oh, why not? Okay. Relative to Don's question, do you see the destruction of democracy with the Republican states' efforts to suppress the votes?
Well, they're
Okay.
sure going to, yeah, they're sure going to make a good effort. Believe me, I don't want to come out of here and anybody thinking I'm a Pollyanna. I am not that optimistic. It is hard to see the world successfully wrapping its hands around the environmental crisis we're in. And you know, one of the reasons, parenthetically, that I am a socialist is there's two aspects of it. One is the justice part of it, that everyone should be able to share in the wealth that everyone creates. The other is a form of efficiency. I cannot see how the structure of multinational corporations vying with each other for profit from whatever. All that matters is the profit, fundamentally, if you're a corporation. I cannot see how in any way that can handle the problems that the world has environmentally. In fact, they're a major reason for them, because these are secondary things. The fact that they even think about consequences now is only because something was forced upon them. So back to the Republicans. No, they understand that they should be defunct. They should be extinct. Every now and then a state legislator will be quoted as saying, well, these changes would put the Republican Party out of business. Yeah, exactly. And they would have to be fools. You know, it's sort of like Kim Jong-un with his nuclear weapons. They ain't going to give up what will keep them going. And I'm not optimistic about that. Somehow we managed to eke out a victory. Now, on the other hand, when I quoted Ralph Nader, I think there was a point to that. And of all, Ralph, is there a fiercer critic of the Democrats from the left than Ralph Nader? Open question. But he thought that if you kept talking like that, you'd win them all. Now, am I optimistic that Biden is going to talk like that regularly? Not particularly. I happen to hear John Nichols today on KPFA talking about the problem that the Democrats right now are not running one person out after the other, hammering on the same things. Again, I said the parties are to a greater extent acting like parliamentary parties which have programmatic unity. If you're with the party, you vote with the party. If you don't want to vote with the party, you leave, right? But the Republicans were in the forefront of that, and they have been and remain in the forefront of the idea of hammering away at your point. There are 216 Democratic reps and 50 senators. They ought to all be out there hammering away at the weak points of Republican policy, and they're not.
Okay, so I have a question in the chat from Ronnie regarding the Greenpeace comment. How does the rest of the world rate?
Oh, well, they only rated the US president. So I didn't see anything in that report. How do they all rate? This is a very good question for which I do not have adequate knowledge. Under the Trump administration, obviously, everyone rated above us. I exaggerate, of course. The reality of what's going on in the EU, I'm not sure. One of their problems is they have a structure that requires unanimity in many things. So they can't do things the way that the US does. Now, that said, I'm not sure if it's most, many, and the bigger ones certainly are ahead of us. Germany, which makes into the press quite a bit, is fundamentally ahead of the US thus far. And I won't go on any further because I don't have enough knowledge to.
Kathleen, unmute yourself, please. Kathleen, unmute yourself, please.
Yes, I was wondering how threatening you saw the so-called Trump big lie in terms of, a huge part of our country is kind of evidently still shadowed by that or still kind of in lockstep with him. You haven't really mentioned that, but I wondered how that fits with the, you called it parliamentary, but it's a bit more than that. It's sort of a kind of a irrationality, it seems to me, with no justifying structure. So just, is it, I mean, I tend to be nervous. Some people tell me, you're not aware that this terrible stuff is still going on and no one's paying attention because Biden is coming out so sanely, But what about you? What do you see as how the Republicans, as this kind of following the leader kind of thing, are threatening the policies that most of us care about?
Well, I did just see some stat for what it's worth that 58% of the Republicans think that what was it, that the events of January 6th at the White House were actually not done by right-wingers, they were done by left-wingers. And okay, yeah, that's pretty tough. I don't know what to say about it. It harkens back, I think, to Nader's point about message. You've got, forget arguing things like that. The election was stolen. Forget.
Okay.
Some of this will fade away. Not all. Within 30% or something, it will be absolutely unmovable, no question. But the idea that being locked in with big business is the average working person's route to well-being has to be hammered away against. And the great Achilles heel of the Democrats, to me, is the area that I ranked lowest, foreign policy. There's been a broad consensus. And as I say, Trump didn't start any new wars. Democrats have done so. So we need to turn a corner on that. I think Bacevich's exhortation to remember that this is impressing our power upon the world has got to stop. And as I say, I wish I could be optimistic. If a Democratic president would hammer home on economic justice and not sending our people abroad for no good reason, I think it would be tough to beat.
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
Okay, another question from the chat from Anne. Has there been a time that a large group of citizens were delusional, as the Trump cult is now?
Oh, I don't know. People thought slavery was cool with God some time ago. That was pretty delusional. We started the 19th century with slavery. We started the 20th century with women not having the vote.
Yeah.
This is delusional in its own way. And though there is such a thing as progress, right? Those things are beyond the pale now, if that's any consolation.
Thank you, it is. perspective, history.
Anyone else have a question? Let's see, Roger.
On voter suppression, it looks like there's going to be a lot of lawsuits coming down the pike. So do you think that's going to help to maybe turn back some of that and prevent some of that from happening?
Oh, I assume some of it. You know, one thing we're not short of is lawyers, and everything will be fought on every level. Some of it will win. The noise certainly has to be kept up on all of this. The ridiculous hypocrisy of talking about people, you know, they're too lazy to work, they're too lazy. They don't say it quite this way anymore, you know, but you know what I mean. And to vote, and they want everything given to them, but we don't actually want them to vote.
Right.
Okay, anyone else have a question? Donald, unmute yourself, please.
Yes, Tom, I'm curious about the last one about foreign relationships, because there I feel you're using coded language. Do you mean the United States should not intervene where the UN thinks there's aggression abroad? Do you think the United States is far too in favor of Israel's response to Hamas? And do you think that the United States should not cultivate friendships with allies such as Japan and South Korea? Do you feel that the United States should not be concerned with any kind of human rights violations such as in China? Could you be specific? And it feels to me like you're using coded language. Show me how wrong I am.
I'm not sure which code, but let's see. On Palestine, Israel, do I think that the United States has been too supportive, the Biden administration, of Israel? Yes, clearly I do. I think that the United States ought not to have 700 plus military bases around the world. That dwarfs the total number of bases of all other foreign bases of all other countries combined. I think our military budget ought not to exceed that of the next 7 combined. I think the mission of dominating the world should not be the American mission. I think that the idea that is a military matter to outcompete China is wrong. I think that we should, in Central America, we should attempt to undo the wrongs that we have done to that nation and attempt to solve the refugee or the asylum crisis that way. I think we should have friendly relations with countries that are democratic. I think we should encourage it. I don't think we should encourage it by deploying B-52s. It will not work. I think we need to be over the illusion that we can invade a foreign country and control them. 20 years of Afghanistan, maybe it will be good enough for that. I'm not sure. What else?
Well, you are against what the United States is doing in so many areas,
Yes.
but you're not formulating alternatives that would improve. So by saying we shouldn't be dominating the world, you haven't said, well, maybe if we don't, some other country might, as far as competing with China, not just militarily, but economically. Yet you haven't said anything about China's ambitions as far as the Pacific is concerned. In other words, you're taking positions that seem morally right, but don't point to any consequences that may not be morally right. But
the purpose of the American military ought to be to defend the country. That should be obvious, but in America, it's a radical statement because the purpose of the American military is considered to be to dominate the world. And if we think China, we had the Asia pivot a couple of years ago. We were finished with Europe. Now we needed to worry about dominating the Pacific. when I see any evidence that China is attempting to dominate the world, we'll talk.
Well, the question about China is whether it's trying to dominate its region. I don't think the dialogue is about China dominating the world, or even if even the Soviet Union was to dominate the surrounding countries and have a negative veto over the world. So saying the military dominating the world is, to me, a kind of twisted determination. You can, and also one of the lessons of World War II is that there is a military challenge when it's across an ocean. So is that dominating the world if we're aware of security questions on other sides of the ocean? So it seems to me that certainly your impulses are correct, but you haven't really thought about consequences, which may be better or may be worse. It seems to me it's undeveloped, your notions about foreign policy, compared to your very specific and sophisticated understanding of domestic affairs. But this can go on forever, so thank you.
Part of the reason is because I think it is within the realm of competence, and it is within the realm of right for Americans to think intensively about what should go on in its country. It is not either of those things for Americans or the American government to do that for the world.
Well, the question is whether they're really doing that for the world.
That's the problem.
Yeah, but that's a broad generalization. The expression
But of course,
doing that for the, as I say, our conversation can continue. Thanks, and
Okay.
Thank
you, Don.
Actually,
Any other questions or comments?
We should replace the troops, the foreign troops, with infrastructure and humanitarian aid. Pull the troops back and close the bases. Actually, China's doing some of that, where they're providing aid to countries, although they're doing it in an exploitive manner. So, but we should be doing that instead of having troops and ships all over the world and trying to intimidate everybody and push our will that way.
I also wanted to add to that. So right now, and I think it's been over 20 plus years, I was born in Kenya, so I still have a lot of relatives in Africa. China is the most prominent country that has gone into African countries and aided in many ways, including their number one goal was to take over the ports, which they are. But I also have to say that if it wasn't China, it would have been Russia. So the countries are making a choice between these two countries. But everyone would love to have United States come and give them aid. So that's Africa. In Sri Lanka, which is the island below India, China has taken over all the ports, and it is heavily investing in Sri Lanka to make it the second Singapore. So I personally believe that the whole world, I was born in United Kingdom, so I know what Europe would love to have. Everyone would love to have US as their ally. And if they don't, it's because some of the history that was created during the British Empire. But right now, I would say that there are other countries like China and Russia that are all over the world as well. So I would prefer, the first choice of every country right now would be to have US as their ally. And whether that's India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Karachi, all of the Middle East, it would be better than having China and Russia as their first choices.
well, if I may, I agree fundamentally with what Roger said. With all you're talking about China's achievements, they did it with a military budget that's what, 5-10% of ours. So worldwide competition between nations is not my ideal of world peace either, but it is so much better than military competition. If they're envious of the Belt and Road Project in Washington that that you've alluded to about China's success all over the place. They didn't do this by attacking a single country, right? If the United States, it's very interesting, the story today about the US shifting its aid to El Salvador from the government to NGOs. And the new president of El Salvador was talking about China. They were the first country, I believe, that they signed for the Belt and Road Project. Okay, so compete with them on that. That would be, and yes, China has been exploitative and they have broader aims, etc. But they are so less damaging than 20 years of war in Afghanistan. This country bombs 7 countries every year. Very few Americans realize that every single year going back, I don't know how many, through Trump, through Obama, through Bush. It's bipartisan. And somehow we think that China's Belt and Road Project and building ports is somehow comparable to that. That's insanity. And the whole world can see it. Only America can't.
If I could add, though, regarding China, I agree with some things that you said about it lifting a lot of people out of poverty. It certainly has done that. But we also have to look at what it's doing to the Uyghurs and what it did to the Tibetans. So while these are not, I don't know the history of China enough to know why it thinks it owns those areas, but nevertheless, it's been called genocide, a cultural genocide, I guess. So and also in Hong Kong, where China is squelching the democratic movement. So I think the worry is that, and maybe it shouldn't be a worry, but the Chinese system is very effective in many ways. I mean, they maybe have some blame for getting COVID started, but they certainly were able to control it much better than Western countries were. So, but they also have this surveillance system of their citizens, and they don't. My impression is, never been there, is that they don't have a lot of civil liberties. So I think that's why I would not like to think that that's the way the world will be in the future. That I'm hoping that the Western, well, it's not even Western, but worldwide liberal democracies are the future. But it's not, it may not happen. And China is really challenging that model, I think, because of their successes.
Again, no disagreement at all. The policy against the Uyghurs, etc., is deplorable. But in the American mind, this gets transferred into thinking, raise the Pentagon budget. Huh? We're not going to bomb them out of this. It can't be done. There are effectively, I believe it's thought to be 5 million people living in literal slavery in India, right? Just tremendously large country. And in there are about 5 million people. We wouldn't think of bombing the country to free those slaves, even though those people obviously need to be freed. It's just does not make sense. And our hang up in world domination is that if there's a bad country out there, that requires us to increase the military budget. And we're fighting the war against intolerance, Muslim fundamentalism, by bombing 7 countries. These things do not add up.
Now, there's a question or a comment actually from Anne again, which is essentially what we just discussed, but I'll read it anyway. China is attacking the Uyghurs in China, Kyrgyzstan, Turkey, and so forth. How do we address the human rights issues?
think China can be one man's friend and the other man's enemy. So it's.
Sure.
I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I think China is one man's treasure and the other man's
Right.
other man's trash. But yeah, I mean, I don't think you'll get any Tibetan or Thailand or any of those to favor China or their way of them running the country. But I'm a little curious about the 5 million slaves in India.
Oh, I'd have to get back to you. You know, I was just something I came across a while ago in preparing for something else, and essentially talking about the foolishness of the Afghanistan war. Yep, you know, in that people will suffer when the Taliban takes over, who are not suffering as bad now. You know, this is true, but you cannot fix that by military invasion. And it came to my attention that there were considered to be 5 million people. I would have to go back and look that up.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I saw that too.
Yeah, I'd love to know because I know the untouchables, but I would love to know. I had a couple of other points I was going to say, just changing a little bit of topic. I wanted to understand the Amazon Union. I know you brought that up, and the Supreme Court, currently what's going on there, if you can help me understand that.
The Amazon Union, for a moment, I thought you were talking about the physical Amazon River.
No.
And I don't, the Amazon Union, did we talk about that? The Amazon Union, well, you know, they were beaten fairly bad. I don't know what I'm not sure I ever saw the final numbers, but I think the pro-union might have been in the 30s, high 30s. I don't know that they cracked 40%. That's bad. There's an ongoing effort on this nationwide, but it's hard to be optimistic. You know, a good pro-labor bill has passed the House, but of course we get to our Senate question, which we've discussed, you know, somewhat extensively. It ain't going to go through there. Even with the filibuster, what's his name from West Virginia ain't for it, I believe. And it's without a change in law, is very hard to be optimistic. Unions have declined continuously. I think the absolute number might have gone up 1 year in the 90s or something like that, when John Sweeney was president of the AFL-CIO and put immense resources into organizing it. It's like they more than held their own 1 year. And you know, probably that the private sector, I believe is it down to 6%? The bulk of union members are public employees. And if you go back in the history of the labor movement, that's the absolute reverse. Public employees in the beginning weren't even eligible for union membership. They were not covered by the National Labor Relations Act. So I wish I could be optimistic. You know, if you follow the scene around here, the Longshoremen Union has been picking off these little things like Dandelion Chocolate and Anchor Brewing, you know, sort of boutique companies. Big ones, not so much. So I don't know what else I can tell you about that. The Supreme Court, I don't know, we don't hear about expanding it lately. It's hard to see that happening again because of the Senate makeup. You would need an influx of senators probably to get anything to change. The question, of course, is going to be, I think, in the next election, what will the breakdown turn out to be in the House? The in-power party generally loses ground in the midterm election, and the majority is what, 5 today or something like that. So that's fairly dismal prospect.
And the unions are continuing the battle against Amazon by suing them for breaking labor laws in that recent election as well.
Yeah, the proposed legislation would, now all you can get from a company if you for a violation of labor law, like if you get fired, you can get back pay for the period you should have been there, but they want if there were damages available, that would make a difference. But again, we've got the problem of seeing that law get through.
We see that some Republicans are standing up to Trump, very few, but hopefully that will grow. Maybe it's a foolish hope, but so do you see the possibility of a realignment so that we would have a third party, particularly as the Democratic Party goes to the left, that more moderate Democrats may join a more centrist party, and those anti-Trump Republicans might join a centrist party?
Well, I don't, but the future only seems obvious when it's past. The Democrats and Republicans have taken the top two slots in the presidential election every time but one since 1856. So if you're a betting person, you're not betting on there being a third significant party in the next 50 years, probably. You never know. There is some people on the left who realize that, well, Sanders running in the Democratic Party really did change things. Some people still deny it, right? The fact that he didn't win is an outrage. We need to now quit the Democratic Party, which we just sort of made grounds in. And they speak of a dirty break, I think is the phrase, that somewhere along the line we break. Well, who wants to be the one that puts the Republicans in the majority? Not me. We are bound together, the centrists and the leftists, I think. If the centrists decide to go, nothing you can really do. But anybody who wants to actually take the White House, and we're only having this discussion today, we only think things are different because of the White House. Everything else is quite secondary to it. Anybody who's really serious about that is probably not looking for a third party at this point. I mean, I say this as somebody who was a Nader supporter in 2000, because I thought something was possible that was not possible. I thought that people could vote tactically, that you would vote for Nader if you were in a state that was not in play, and that something could be built sort of in the interstices of the system. Turned out, obviously, to be wrong. And I don't see that changing. It's sort of too sophisticated a notion for people. They don't think through the electoral college. And in a certain sense, why should they? It's foolishness, but tactically one would have to, and I don't see it happening. So no, I don't. A long-winded way of saying no.
Okay. Who else has a question? You can just blurt it out if you like. I don't see anyone. So we have a few minutes left, about 10 minutes. So I'll bring up another issue. And that's, I know the Democratic Socialists tend to be still for Medicare for all, as well as many other left-wing Democrats. My question with regard to Obamacare, assuming that there is a public option, which I don't think we have yet, right? Assuming that a public option is put into play there, do you think this is a way of essentially getting to Medicare for all, or let's use the word universal health care,
Right.
rather than Medicare, because it's a very specific proposal, but universal insurance, which would hopefully mean universal health care?
I think it would be useful. I mean, anything that covers more people I certainly don't think we have to hold out for the big one and oppose any small thing. Had I been in Congress, I would have been just like Dennis Kucinich, against Obama's bill until the last moment. You had to vote for it as opposed to the status quo. Interesting thing, you referred to healthcare, universal health insurance, or whatever phrase you used. Interesting to me because any phrase that we use is problematic. When we started on single payer healthcare, I was involved in Proposition 187 in, what was that, 94. And you would talk about single payer healthcare, people go, single parent healthcare? What? They didn't know what you're talking about, but it was, something. So then we switched to Medicare for all. And the problem there is that people understandably assume we're speaking of the Medicare program as it exists today, spreading to everyone. Why would you think differently? But in fact, the bills are much more expansive than Medicare today. And the problem is I've run into people who I would have assumed would know differently, who did not understand that the bill was different than that. So logically, we've got millions of people out there who are saying, or potentially saying, my insurance is better than that. And it isn't better than what we're asking for. It's always a problem. Universal is a better phrase, but Medicare for all was taken because it's a familiar phrase.
Okay. Anyone else with a question or comment before we wind up here?
Let me say this. I write articles periodically that I send out to people. If you care to be on my list, either put it in chat or email me. My email is my initials 5 times, tg@aol.com.
Okay, TG 5 times at AOL.com. You should be able to remember that.
Tom, would you be able to give me the name of the international EPA agency you were talking about?
Oh, the one that said we needed to stop like right away?
Right.
Yeah, let me see. I do have that one I can answer right away. It is the International Energy Agency.
Oh, okay.
How about that? If you Google it, you should find a story that's only a couple of days old. A bunch of stories about their statement.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Sorry.
Okay. Dave. Unmute yourself, Dave.
Yeah, just a general question on what do you think are our prospects for actually coping with climate change in a way that will avoid our destruction?
Me?
Yeah, anybody.
Not good.
Not
Not good. I mean, to be to start to think concretely about it, the world won't be shifted off its axis. It's nothing like that. The world will continue to exist. But I would think huge numbers of people are going to suffer and be dislocated. And the correction of that, we're certainly not on track. We are not on track to getting on track, like the plans to make plans.
Yeah, right.
The inequality in the world plays a role in this. Here we are in this country that uses more energy than anybody, that uses multiple of many times compared to many countries in the world, pontificating to the world, to the poor people of the world. We got to regulate our energy use. Now, there were workarounds and shortcuts. Certainly, solar power has been immediately adapted in some places in the world because it wasn't infrastructure, and it works for that. But no, I deny being an optimist, as I was accused of earlier.
We've got to keep our hope up, though.
Yes, say pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will, as Antonio Gramsci once said.
I
Well,
think just to add to that, if you watch 60 Minutes, which was about three weeks ago, 60 Minutes with Bill Gates, you'll get a much better understanding about what the international world, including the US, is doing about climate change.
And is it going to make people optimistic?
Very much.
Oh, okay.
I mean, Bill Gates, he himself has invested in 30 companies, but if you watch the 60 Minutes, you'll get a much bigger understanding about some of the environmental industries that are being targeted right now, and by pretty much internationally. So
Good. Listen to her, not me.
60 Minutes.
More optimistic tone here. Well, we're just about out of time, so I want to thank Tom very much. This was a very interesting. I learned a lot, and I really enjoyed the discussion. So I thank everyone for participating in the discussion, and I hope you'll join us for our future events.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye. Nice seeing everyone.
thank you very much. Thank you.
you.